The judge didn't raise his voice, and that's what changed everything. A struggling father stood alone in the courtroom, facing a minor violation that no longer felt minor at all. On paper, it was just a small infraction, something that might barely register in the system. But for him, it had grown into a heavy fine he simply could not afford. Not now. Not with everything else already weighing him down. He didn't walk in with anger on his face. He didn't come prepared to argue. There was no frustration aimed at the judge, the system, or the officers who had issued the ticket. Instead, there was exhaustion, the kind that settles into your shoulders after months of trying to hold things together without letting them fall apart. His posture said more than his words ever could. Slightly hunched, hands clasped in front of him, eyes steady but tired. This wasn't someone trying to escape responsibility. This was someone who had run out of room to breathe. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost restrained. Not because he wasn't emotional, but because he had already spent that emotion elsewhere. At home, with bills, with conversations he never wanted to have but couldn't avoid. He explained how it started with just one missed payment. One moment where priorities collided. Rent was due. Groceries were running low. A child needed something for school. He made a choice that felt necessary at the time. A reasonable choice, given the circumstances. But one missed payment didn't stay one missed payment. Late fees followed. Notices arrived. Stress grew quietly, stacking itself day after day. Each letter felt heavier than the last. What began as a manageable issue slowly turned into a financial wall he couldn't climb over. He described how every month became a calculation. What could wait? What absolutely couldn't? How some needs were met only by postponing others. There was no drama in his explanation. No attempt to gain sympathy. Just facts. Just reality. As he spoke, the courtroom changed. The usual background noise faded. Papers stopped rustling. People shifted less in their seats. Conversations that often quietly hummed in public spaces like this simply stopped. It wasn't commanded. It happened naturally. The courtroom went silent. Not the uncomfortable kind of silence, but the attentive one. The kind that forms when people are actually listening. Judge Frank Caprio sat at the bench, reviewing the case file in front of him. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush the explanation. His eyes moved between the documents and the man standing before him, absorbing both the written record and the human reality behind it. The father continued, explaining how he was trying to keep his family afloat. How missing work to deal with court dates meant losing pay. How every solution seemed to create a new problem. Pay the fine and fall behind somewhere else. Miss the payment and face even more penalties. He wasn't asking for special treatment. He wasn't asking to be excused. He was asking to be heard. That alone took courage. Many people in his position stay quiet. They accept outcomes they don't understand because pushing back feels risky. Speaking honestly in a courtroom requires trust. And trust doesn't come easily when the stakes feel high. Judge Caprio listened without visible reaction. His expression stayed neutral, focused. Not distant, not cold, just present. He scanned the file again, as if matching each line on paper to the story unfolding in front of him. The father finished speaking and waited. No dramatic pause. No emotional plea at the end. Just silence. That silence carried weight. It was filled with everything that hadn't been said. The early mornings. The late nights. The pressure of being responsible for others while barely keeping yourself steady. Anyone paying attention could feel it. This wasn't about avoiding accountability. It was about context. It was about how small decisions can snowball when life offers no margin for error. The courtroom remained quiet as Judge Frank Caprio continued reviewing the case. Every movement felt deliberate. Every second stretched slightly longer than usual. People in the room sensed that this wasn't going to be handled mechanically. This was a moment where the system and the person intersected, and everyone waited to see which one would speak first. Judge Frank Caprio finally looked up from the paperwork resting on his bench. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of pause that makes a room hold its breath without realizing it. The courtroom, already quiet, felt still. Not because anyone was told to be silent, but because everyone sensed that this moment mattered. Judge Caprio's expression was steady. Not stern, not soft, just balanced. The look of someone who understood that every decision carries weight, and that weight doesn't come from authority alone, but from responsibility. When he spoke, his voice was calm and measured. "The law gives me discretion," he said, clearly and without hesitation. "And discretion exists to be fair." There was no emphasis meant to impress, no raised tone, no attempt to make the words sound bigger than they were. Yet every word landed exactly where it needed to, not just on the man standing before him, but on everyone listening. Discretion, as Judge Caprio explained through his tone, rather than a lecture, wasn't about ignoring the law. It wasn't about being lenient for the sake of kindness. It was about applying the law the way it was meant to be applied, with judgment, with context, with humanity. He acknowledged the violation. The fine existed for a reason. Rules were broken, and rules matter. Society depends on them. But rules are not meant to operate in isolation from reality. They are meant to serve people, not crush them. Then came the decision. The fine was dismissed. There was no dramatic pause before the ruling. No long explanation filled with legal language. Just a simple, direct outcome delivered with quiet certainty. For a moment, nothing happened. The struggling father standing before the bench didn't immediately react. His face stayed still, as if his mind needed a second to catch up with what his ears had just heard. Relief doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives carefully, almost cautiously, afraid it might disappear if acknowledged too quickly. His shoulders slowly dropped, tension easing in a way that suggested he had been carrying more weight than anyone realized. Not just financial weight, but emotional pressure. The kind that builds when every decision feels like a potential failure. Judge Caprio continued speaking briefly, not to justify himself, but to clarify the principle behind the ruling. He explained that fairness sometimes means looking beyond the violation and understanding the circumstances that led to it. Justice, he made clear, is not weakened by compassion, is strengthened by it. The courtroom didn't react the way people often expect in emotional stories. There was no applause, no murmurs of surprise, no visible celebration. Instead, there was respect. People remained still, absorbing what they had just witnessed. Some nodded quietly. Others stared ahead, thoughtful. This wasn't entertainment. It was instruction, a reminder of what justice can look like when applied correctly. The silence wasn't awkward. It was meaningful. Judge Caprio didn't smile. He didn't seek gratitude. He didn't frame the moment as extraordinary. For him, this was simply the law working the way it was designed to work. With discretion, with fairness, with awareness that real lives exist behind case numbers. He moved on to the next case without ceremony. But the impact lingered. For the father, that decision meant more than money saved. It meant dignity preserved. It meant that his honesty mattered. That standing in front of the court and telling the truth, even when it was uncomfortable, still held value. For everyone else in the room, it shifted perspective. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't need to assert dominance. It didn't need to intimidate. It listened first. It evaluated carefully. Then it acted. Real justice doesn't shout. It doesn't humiliate people. It doesn't rush to punish. It listens before it decides. That quiet ruling carried a lesson far beyond the courtroom walls. It showed that authority can coexist with compassion. That fairness doesn't mean treating everyone the same, but treating each situation with understanding. The room eventually moved forward. Another name was called. Another case began. Life continued, but the message stayed. Justice is not just about enforcing rules. It's about knowing when understanding matters more. And in that moment, Judge Frank Caprio reminded everyone present that the strongest decisions are often delivered in the calmest voices.